I think that's the easy thing to say, Ross, and I think people who say that are not thinking that through. Don't you think the Seahawks know that? I mean, they're talking as if the Seahawks don't know that. They have a new offensive coordinator in Kubiak.
You're tuned in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, guiding your gridiron journey, none other than your host, former NFL lineman, Ross Tucker.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. It's another surprise Tuckheads Tuesday. Listen, here's the deal, okay? In the offseason, we do 3 Ross Tucker Football Podcasts a week. Always one on Monday, or almost always. Gonna have one Thursday or Friday. And then sometimes Tuesday, sometimes Wednesday. Depends on a bunch of factors, including this week some travel on my side. So we're releasing it on Tuesday, and I like to keep you guys on your toes a little bit as it relates to when Greg Cosell will be on the show. I want to get with Greg on some of the news. Derek Stingley gets a huge deal. I actually will be talking about that a little bit later in the show. The Eagles continue to make moves. So we'll get to that. And I also want to get Greg's opinion on the Bengals keeping both their receivers and feeling like there might be a couple of slot receivers up there in Seattle now. So we'll get to that with Greg. And obviously, we're going to talk about running backs today. It's thought to be a really good running back draft class. We'll find out whether or not Greg agrees as well, and we'll get to the news a little bit later. As a reminder, love those of you that follow us on social media, at Ross Tucker Pod, whatever platform you're on, we are on. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. Get a ton of people that check us out on YouTube, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. Very cool to watch these shows. Make sure you turn on the notifications so you know when a new episode is posted, or when we even post some of the highlight clips of this show or the college draft, Even Money, Fantasy Feast, those other shows as well. You can follow me on social at Ross Tucker NFL. It's Big Show time.
The Big Show.
All right, Greg, want to get to the running backs with you because it's thought to be a good class, might have a couple of first rounders this year. But before we do, there is some veteran news to get to, including, speaking of the draft, a guy in Derek Stingley who became by far the highest paid corner in NFL history. And this is important, I feel like, Greg, to talk about this time of year, because this is a guy that, refresh my memory, I think he had an incredible freshman year.
Then got hurt.
Then either sophomore or junior, maybe he opted out with COVID, and then another year he got hurt. So he's had kind of I remember there being a lot of conversation about him when he came out in the draft a few years ago.
Yeah, and you nailed it, Ross. He had a great freshman year. Everybody saw the trades. Everybody said this guy's a big-time corner prospect, and then he really didn't play much after that. But he's a great corner. The interesting thing, is he's not a matchup corner. He plays left corner. And now again, maybe they'll change things this year. Who knows? But he's been a left corner for the Texans. He is not a matchup corner. Because I always love when the schedule comes out and people start with, well, who's Derek? Who's this corner going to match up with? Who are the matchups? Well, he plays left corner. But he's a terrific player. I mean, he's got phenomenal ball skills, and he's obviously got great speed. He can run with vertical routes. He's just a great corner. I mean, you got to have corners in this league, and he's a great one.
Just curious your thoughts on matching versus keeping a guy on one side or the other, because I've talked to a lot of people about this, and there's really pros and cons of both approaches.
Yeah, I don't have a brilliant answer for that. I mean, I think it probably has to do, too, with comfort level and technique. I mean, it's just like, offensive tackles when people assume, just take a right tackle, move him to left tackle, take a left tackle, move him to right tackle. My guess is the footwork's different. What you see is different. How you process it is different. Now, again, if you're just going to play a ton of man and you're saying to a corner, hey, you've got this cat and you're going to play a lot of press man, maybe it's different. But teams don't really do that. So A lot of these corners in the NFL, even the really, really good ones like Stingley, and he's a top 3 corner in this league for sure, very often they just play on one side. And that's the way they play. And then you see that more often than corners traveling with receivers. It's more rare to see corners matching up with one receiver and traveling with him all around. It happens on occasion, but not as much as people might think.
I wanted to ask you, the big news late Sunday night that was talked about a lot yesterday was the Bengals getting it done. 4-year deals with Ja'Marr Chase and Tee Higgins. Obviously, they're both tremendous players. We've talked about both at different times. I guess my question is, Greg, you watch a lot of tape. How important in your mind, how critical is it to have a really good number 2 receiver, to have that other guy that can really play?
I think it's absolutely critical because with the way defenses play now, with a lot more split safety, it becomes easier to bracket, double, whatever term you want to use, a number 1 receiver without, just within the context of your defensive structure. So now you can think of it this way. It is always possible to double two receivers if you want to. Obviously, that changes your whole defensive feel and how you do other things. But teams don't really do that. So they'll try to double one in specific situations, and you certainly see that with the big time receivers. You see it with Chase at times. You see it with Justin Jefferson. You see it with A.J. Brown at times. But if you have that number 2 receiver that's really, really good, and Higgins, my guess is, for a number of teams in the league, would be seen as a number 1 for some teams in the league for sure, then it just gets harder. It just gets harder to play on defense because it's the way you allocate your resources, so to speak, on defense, what you do with your linebackers, what you do on your back end. Do you want to pressure? Do you want to compromise numbers and coverage? It gets into so many different elements, Ross, as to how you want to play because football's a numbers game. If you can rush 4 and be great, then you have 7 in coverage. If you feel like you have to rush 5, the numbers in coverage start decreasing, and that really impacts how you can play good receivers.
Speaking of good receivers, and speaking of having 2, we talked last week about Cooper Kupp. You voiced some concerns about, his explosiveness and just how much he had left. The Seahawks are bringing him up here, and they still have Smith and Jigba. And what I think is interesting here, and I got a question from a listener, Greg. Now, I don't remember if it was social media or if it was an email question, ross@rosstucker.com. But they said, can you ask Greg about the Seahawks now having 2 slot receivers?
Yeah, well, that's...
And Smith and Jigba and Kupp and how that'll work?
I think that's the easy thing to say, Ross, and I think people who say that are not thinking that through. Don't you think the Seahawks know that? I mean, they're talking as if the Seahawks don't know that. They have a new offensive coordinator in Kubiak. They're going to line up, my guess is they're going to be very multiple with their formations. They're going to have a lot of reduced splits. There's going to be a lot of motion. They're not going to line up static and just say, oh, we have 2 slot receivers. We don't know what to do. Of course, they know all this. So they're going to have an offense that doesn't play in sort of an old-fashioned way where they just line up and there's a slot receiver and they go, oh, we got 2 of them. They're going to be very multiple. They're going to be reduced. They're going to have motion. They're going to do a lot of things. They obviously researched Kupp and they believe he's healthy, obviously, or they wouldn't assign him to a 3-year deal. And they're going to be really diverse in how they play. So to me, the easy answer for people who are not thinking it through is, oh, they got 2 slot receivers. That they know that. I mean, that's one of those things where, you got to think this through a little more.
Let's get to the running backs, Greg, because we know people love hearing your breakdown of the top prospects. I don't like to steer you in a corner, even though there's one guy that's very, very highly thought of, but it's thought to be a good running back class.
Yep.
Greg, and I'm curious what if there was a guy that you thought was a clear number one.
Well, I mean, there's two guys I love in this class. There's more than two, but I mean, just in terms of like right at, that I think are just NFL runners. And obviously everyone's going to talk about Jeanty and deservedly so. I mean, his contact balance is ridiculous. I mean, he consistently just absorbed and pinballed off tacklers without any balance disruption. I could read you my notes. It would take 10 minutes. I mean, he's a really, really good prospect. We know that. And again, I don't know where he'll go. I just want to say one thing though. Last year, 6 running backs in the NFL, I believe it was 6, had over 300 carries. We don't know if 1 year is a trend in the way the game is changing, Ross. We don't know that. It's 1 year. But that had not happened for years and years. And the running game last year, as you well know, you cover the league and do games, the running game seemed to become more important to a lot of teams last year, and the need to really run the ball, not only with good production, but with more volume. So it'll be interesting to see. And obviously the Eagles won the Super Bowl with Barkley having one of the best years by a running back in the history of the game. So we'll see if there's a trend or if just a 1 year aberration. But clearly the running game was a bigger deal a year ago than it had been in previous years throughout the league. The other back that I really love on tape, absolutely love on tape, was Omarion Hampton from North Carolina. I just think this guy looks... And you'll know what I mean. I hope people, can get a feel for it. I watch this guy and I just say that's an NFL back. I mean, he has size, he has burst, he has speed, he has physicality, he's got power. He's got a physical presence as a runner. Jeanty's a really interesting guy in that he bounces off people, but he doesn't. Hampton has sort of a bigger presence when you watch him run, and you just see it when he runs. I mean, to me, Hampton is a tempo setter for an offense that if you want to control the pace and tempo of games, he's got a foundation back mentality. I really like Omarion Hampton. Again, this is not, it's always hard for me to make lists and say one guy's better than the other. I think Jeanty is probably going to be viewed as number one, although it would not surprise me if some teams thought Hampton was right there with him. But I really like Omarion Hampton a lot.
Just curious. Don't want you to force it. Never want you to force it. Did either one of those guys stylistically remind you of anyone? And the only reason why I say that is you did a good job describing them. But a lot of our listeners and people that watch on YouTube, they don't really watch college football. So if there's ever a guy that jumps out to you that, it's interesting to me, a lot of people have been comparing Jeanty to a former teammate of mine, Emmitt Smith, which I thought was really interesting. They said Emmitt Smith with speed is one that I've heard. I mean, that's a pretty good compliment.
That's quite the comparison. I'm a little leery of comparing someone to Emmitt Smith. That's quite the comparison.
What about, Greg, is there a next guy on your list? Some of the other guys that jump out are Kaleb Johnson from Iowa and the 2 Ohio State kids, TreVeyon Henderson and Quinshon Judkins.
Yeah, TreVeyon Henderson is really, really interesting because he is explosive. I don't know if he's a quote-unquote foundation back. He does have, I think theoretically he could be, but I don't think he would start his career like that. I mean, so I'll give you a comparison to like two names that came to mind when I watched Henderson, okay? One is a little bit of an older player, but people will remember because he was a great player. I thought there was a little bit of Brian Westbrook in Henderson's game. And another back that came to mind when I was evaluating Henderson was Aaron Jones, who's, of course, still in the league. But Henderson, I think that he's probably a little stiff in the hips, a little stiffer than people would want, for a true feature back. But he's big, he's physical, he's explosive. He's got big playability to hit the home run. So he to me was a really intriguing guy. I personally liked him. They're totally different, but I liked him more than his teammate Judkins, who's more of that rugged, grinding. He's one of those kinds of backs. I mean, there's a back that I found that is not being talked about, and I have no idea how people see him. I can only tell you how I see him, Ross, and I was really fascinated by him, and that's the kid at the University of Miami, Damien Martinez. I know he's not being talked about a ton, but I really like this kid a lot. He's about 6 feet. He was 217 at the combine. He's a physical runner, but he's got quick feet. And the high percentage, he's got great experience. In 2023, he played at Oregon State, and he was an I back. And then this year at Miami, he was more of a shotgun back. But he's got quickness, he's got decisiveness, he's got short area burst, and he's got natural power. I mean, and I think power is a really, really important trait. When you get to this league, and this, everything can't be, just shake and bake. You have to run with power. You have to be the kind of back. If you're going to be a true feature back, you have to be the kind of back that when it's blocked for 3, you get 6. You have to be able to do that in this league. And I got to tell you, the guy that Martinez reminded me of, and again, it's not an exact comparison, he reminded me of Josh Jacobs now. Because Josh Jacobs is not quite the same explosive back he was 3 or 4 years ago. Jacobs is just, he's explosive in terms of his power. And I think Martinez is very much like that.
Interesting. I did Martinez's first game in 2003, Oregon State against San Jose State. They had Fuaga, Josh Gray. They had a good O-line, too. DJ Uiagalelei was their quarterback.
Yeah, we talked about that. I remember when you did that game, and I mentioned to you, take a look at Damien Martinez.
Yeah, he was the star. He's got some stuff to him. I can't say the other word I would say, but
yeah,
he's got some stuff to him.
And look, you did the game, Russ. Didn't you see it immediately? The guy there's a powerful feel to this kid.
Yeah, I enjoyed watching him. It's funny, you mentioned Judkins as more of the banger. It strikes me as Ohio State kind of had the perfect complement with those two. With Henderson and Judkins, it was like those guys complemented each other very, very well. Probably one of the reasons why they won the national championship.
Yeah, no, Judkins is a good prospect. I don't want to act like I don't think he's a good. I mean, he's sort of the downhill, decisive velocity runner with enough lateral quickness to beat backfield penetration and slide into the open gaps. He's not stiff. He's got natural power. He's got really good contact balance. He can run through some tackles. He can finish runs. But I would view him more as kind of a grinder and a sustainer. He's got great contact aggression. I mean, this guy, he's a physical back. I don't know. Maybe I've learned from a lot of people that, in this league, and you would probably agree, I think you have to have some kind of physical nature to your game. I mean, even the backs we think of that may not be physical. I mean, think of someone like James Cook, okay? Probably at 200 pounds, maybe less. But there's some physical runs there when you watch him. You have to have some physicality. And you have to be able to get hard yards. That's just the nature of the league.
No question. What did you think of Kaleb Johnson from Iowa, Greg?
Yeah, Kaleb Johnson to me was very much. I mean, the term that I used when I wrote him up. I think he's even though he's big, I thought that he was more smooth and fluid. I thought he was more a finesse back than a physical power runner. To me, he was kind of a paint by numbers runner in that he's his own runner. It was clean. He hit it. He knew where to go. He was decisive. He was efficient. But I thought that he was another back that to me that fit the profile of a sustaining back. Can he be efficient? Like if you put him with the Niners, a team like that, I think he could be a really efficient runner. I think that he's that kind of back, but I didn't think he had special traits.
I got to ask you about this guy because, man, he took college football by storm this year. So fun to watch. I guess I'm a little bit surprised he's not being ranked higher by people, Greg. I don't study him. I I just watched a few games and was like, holy crap. And that's Cam Skattebo from Arizona State.
Yeah, I did him in great detail, and he's a really fun watch. I mean, this kid, like, you want this kid in your running back room. You know, he's just, I never met the kid, but just the way he plays. He's an interesting guy, Ross, because he's somewhat tight-hipped. He's got some stiffness to him. He doesn't have higher level athletic traits, which shows up at times. But there is absolutely no question that this kid is a tempo setter as a runner. He's got sustaining traits. He gets hard yards. He's got a physical profile. He's so compact. And the mental toughness. He's got really good contact balance. He's a finisher. You know, is someone going to look at him and say he's a primary back in my system with the right quarterback and the O-line and receivers? Maybe. I mean, look, I'll give you an example. He's not the same back as that guy I'm going to mention, but who thought coming out of Notre Dame that Kyron Williams would be a feature back? And Kyron Williams had 316 rushes this year and didn't even play in the last game of the season. And he's not an explosive back. So again, you have to think about how teams, the offense they run, how they can put guys into their system. But Skattebo is a really fun watch, and he is a physical guy. And he weighed about 219. He's just short, so he looks so compact, but he's not small.
No, he definitely is not. He is awesome to watch. You're awesome to listen to, Greg. Always appreciate the time. Check him out on social so you always know what Greg's up to, at Greg Cosell. Next week, we will talk receivers. Curious to see where you have Travis Hunter stacked up. Greg, thanks so much for the time. Always appreciate it.
Thanks, Russ. Appreciate it.
College basketball is hot and heavy over the next few weeks, and you guys can go, all of you, thanks to my friends at the Game Time app. I'm checking it out right now. You can go to Thursday's session, which includes like the Houston Cougars in Wichita, Kansas, $16. Are you kidding me? I mean, Dayton, Ohio tonight, $75. If you've never taken your child to any of these college basketball tournament games, highly, highly encourage you doing so. That was something my dad and I did almost anytime it was in Philly or it was, in New Jersey, we would go. It's an incredible atmosphere. The Game Time picks, it helps you find better value for tickets to sports, concerts, comedy, theater. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code ROSS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So again, create an account and redeem code ROSS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Absolutely love watching college hoops once the tournament starts, and you guys can drink some Labatt Blue Lights like I'll be drinking, and you can get cool gear. It's called Buy Beer, Get Gear. Go to rewards.labattusa.com to sign up. You get points for every purchase at any store, bar, or stadium, any size, any product, anywhere you're buying Labatt. Just upload it instantly. They'll be getting points on the court. You get points off the court. Rewards.labattusa.com.
Tuck's Takes.
All right, Ross, something you and Greg talked about earlier in the show. The Texans made Derek Stingley by far the highest paid cornerback in NFL history, resetting the market at $30 million a year.
Yeah, you just reminded me, by the way, I should have mentioned Greg was presented by Smirnoff, the world's #1 vodka. Please drink responsibly. Forgot to mention that at the start with Greg. Stingley is a fantastic player. I don't need to reiterate what Greg said. I always do find it interesting, though, when someone leaps the rest of the market by this much, right? Like, kudos to the agent when this happens. Happened with Myles Garrett, getting several more million per year than what we saw from, Max Crosby. Now the same thing with Stingley, leaping way over Surtain and J.C. Horn.
Ronald Darby continues his NFL World Tour, signing with the Texans as well as fullback Jacob Johnson.
It is interesting to me how certain teams seem like they are more active at different times, right? It's like the Texans all of a sudden signed 3 guys yesterday. Derek Stingley to this gigantic contract. But then they get a fullback in there, which gives them another element to that they want in Jacob Johnson and Ronald Darby, who, you know, as Greg would say at this point of his career, he's kind of a pro. He's a professional corner. You kind of know what you're getting there. Kind of similar to what the Eagles are getting when they signed Adoree Jackson. You know, these are guys that they're probably not the reason why you win anymore, but they might not be the reason why you lose if they got to play.
The Eagles remained active. They signed former Giants edge rusher Azeez Ojulari to a one-year, $4 million deal, and they give Lane Johnson a one-year extension through 2027, guaranteeing $40 million over the next 2 years.
So what's really interesting is how often the Eagles do this, how often the Eagles will give a guy a new contract even though he's got multiple years remaining. A.J. Brown, Saquon Barkley, you know, they have guys that they think are exceptional players, and they make exceptions for them. We got to look it up, by the way, Jack, because Lane has made so much money. Good for him, but it's crazy to think how much money he's made because they've ripped up his contract, I feel like, 10 different times. As for Ojulari, now they got some real options. You know, with Jalix Hunt and Nolan Smith, now they got Uche, Ojulari, Bryce Huff. They really only need one of those other three veteran guys to pan out. They're probably all about a 50-50 shot. Well, if you have three guys at a 50-50 shot, that the math works there. March Madness NCAA tournament is here. One of the best times of the year to get a delicious Smirnoff. Maybe if you're skiing all day, like I'm going to be this weekend, you have some Pedialyte or Gatorade Zero, tastes delicious with your vodka, and then you're hydrating while you're getting a little vodka in there. They're also sponsoring this show. They're sponsoring the draft. They're sponsoring everything because Smirnoff's awesome and it's affordable, which I really appreciate. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff number 21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. Please not share with anyone under legal drinking age.
And last but certainly not least, the Steelers, they signed a pair of wide receivers in Scotty Miller and Ben Scarani, and then they also brought in safety Juan Thornhill.
Did you call Ben Skoranek Ben Scarani?
Yeah, I thought it was Scarani. Is it Skoranek?
It's Skoranek. I thought maybe that was like your pet nickname for him or something. But yes, the Steelers joined the Texans and the Eagles in teams that were very active yesterday. We are very active with the Even Money Betting Podcast today. Emery was fantastic yesterday on the College Draft Podcast talking about the next position group, so check that out. We'll have receivers with Greg next week. Other than that, I think we're done here.
Thanks for tuning in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also check out Even Money, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network on Samsung TV Plus, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
Shout out myfrontpagestory.com. There's never a bad time to give someone the best gift they'll ever get and to tell them how you and the rest of the family feels about them, or to just get a signed press pass or football card or picture from me. It's automatic when you go to myfrontpagestory.com if you forward me the email, ross@rosstucker.com, backofficescheduler.com, humanheadnyc.com, Sporticulture, Pizza Boy Brewing.